Hello and greetings from RPGmodsFan. I have broken up my walkthrough, review, and discussion of the D&D B6 The Veiled Society module into 3 parts. This is the second part. I would suggest watching the first part before watching this video. In this video, I will be summarizing the B6 module and discussing its cast of characters/factions and its timeline. Hence, this video is appropriate for Dungeon Masters only, and there will be spoilers ahead. Next week, I will release the third and final part.
Hello and greetings, and welcome to the Blue Water Mead Hall. The place has not been the same since a group of adventurers took down the Veiled Society. I am Anya of Roga T. No. And, yes, I am one of Red Sonja's sisters. On behalf of RPGmodsFan, I will be narrating most of the Dungeon Master's Guide and walkthrough portion of this video. A synopsis of the B6 module's adventure would be as follows. The player characters investigate the murder of the niece of a powerful merchant and are unwittingly involved in the power struggles of 3 rival factions. I would summarize the module as follows. The adventuring party enter the city of Specularum. Then they see arguing men from different factions halt a festival procession. After finding rooms to stay in at 2 or more inns, a few of the player characters are contacted and offered employment by the Toronescu faction, while the other player characters are contacted and offered employment by the Veiled Society, which is controlled and operated by the Radu faction. In the morning at the inn, where the adventuring party has gathered, a panicking widow bursts in and insists there are demons in the cellar of her house. The adventuring party investigate the widow's cellar and find tunnels dug out by kobolds and hobgoblins. They also find the murdered body of Lucia Vorloy, the niece of the powerful and influential merchant, Baron Vorloy. The player characters then embark on investigating the murder. As an important side note, one of the clues found at the crime scene will be strands of red hair. Within a few days, Lucia's death triggers a riot and unrest in the city of Specularum. The Duke's horsemen and soldiers attempt to quash the riot. A couple of days after the riot, the Veiled Society tries to kidnap Simeon Toronescu. Days afterwards, regardless if they are aligned with them or not, the Veiled Society then try to ambush and assassinate the adventuring party. Another important note, since pursuit of fleeing NPCs will be crucial, this module is made for player characters who do not have their movement hampered. In other words, those who wear no armor or light armor and are not encumbered. Since this is a beginner-level module, those who can wear medium or heavy armor, such as fighters and clerics, will probably not afford to buy such armor. If, or when they can, then the Dungeon Master should say, such armor will not be available for a couple of months, due to shortages and/or pre-existing orders, or any such similar excuse. Since this module is a heavy role-playing adventure, the player characters will be interacting with a lot of non-player characters. The Veiled Society is a feared criminal organization operating in Specularum. Members wear hooded robes to hide their identities, not only to the outside world, but also from each other. Thus, if the player characters capture and interrogate any member, that member will not know who heads the organization. The member will only know that the Veiled Society regularly meets in a secret chamber that is accessed by a secret entrance from the Blue Water Mead Hall, which is located by the wharf. Although the city of Specularum has many factions, the player characters will be interacting with only 3 of them in this adventure. These factions are, in essence, feuding families. They are the feuding families of Radu, Toronescu, and Vorloy. All are human, and no members of any of the families have red hair. The Radu family are the shipping magnates of Specularum and have a strong control over the waterfront of the city. They best described as a gangster/mobster family. They also control and operate the Veiled Society. Not only are the Radu family feuding with the Toronescu and Vorloy families, but there is also quite a bit of feuding within the family itself. The head of the family and of the Veiled Society is Anton Radu. Within this adventure, it is possible for some player characters to be employed by the Veiled Society. In this instance, Theodosius Radu will be the player character's contact person. The Toronescu family is a fading nobility. Although still influential, they no longer wield the power they once had. The 26-year-old, Alexander Toronescu, heads the family. His deceased father was the head of the family. Lady Magda will be this year's leader of the Festival of Lucor's procession. It is possible for some player characters to be employed by the Toronescu family. In this instance, their agent, Theodosius, will be the player character's contact person. Later on in the adventure, Simeon Toronescu will be the target of a kidnapping/assassination plot by the Veiled Society. The Vorloy family are upstart merchants. Baron Vorloy heads the family. Lucia Vorloy, daughter of Fortunato Vorloy and niece of Baron Vorloy, was murdered by members of the Veiled Society. Stefanos Toronescu courted Lucia and sought her hand in marriage. However, Lucia has rejected and spurred him. Thus, Stefanos will be the primary suspect of the murder. I will now go through the module's timeline of events. My apologies in advance. I will be repeating many things I have already mentioned before. The module begins with the player characters entering the city of Specularum during the Festival of Lucor. This year, Lady Magda, of the Toronescu family, was chosen to lead the festival's procession. In front of the adventurers will be 3 intensely arguing men. 2 of them are from the Radu faction, the other is from the Toronescu faction, who is also the procession's head-bearer. The men from the Radu faction purposely begun the altercation and are escalating it. Due to being in the path of the procession, their argument has halted it. Unless the player characters act, the argument will turn to violence. If violence erupts, men from the Vorloy faction show up and break up the fight. The player character's next task is to find rooms to stay in. However, due to the festival, all the inns are overcrowded, and the innkeepers will refuse to house more than 3 people to a room, thus forcing the party to split up and stay at separate inns. Once the player characters have paid for their rooms, the dungeon master, at random, determines which one of the characters have been pickpocketed out of a few coins. This is an automatic event that cannot be prevented, so dungeon masters should be prepared for some griping from their players. Soon afterwards, the player characters are contacted by agents of 2 of the families, offering them work. Strong-looking characters, such as fighters, are contacted by an agent of the Toronescu family, named Theodosius. Player characters who are rogues, or are standing outside, are contacted by, obviously shady-looking characters. These hooded men are members of the Veiled Society. If attacked, they will flee immediately. Regardless of the outcome, all the players' characters are watched and spied upon by agents of the Veiled Society. The next morning, at the inn where most of the player characters are gathered, Goodwife Thanato, a widow and elderly woman, bursts in, is in panic, and frantically asks for aid. She claims she hears demons in her cellar and asks for someone to go investigate. If the player characters refuse, the innkeeper threatens to toss them out into the street and spread the word that they are debtors and, hence, will not be able to find lodging at any inn in the city. So, what are the noises the widow is hearing? It is a group of kobolds and hobgoblins who were hired by the Veiled Society to dig tunnels so that they can gain access to the houses of their enemies. The adventuring party also interrupt 2 Veiled Society members who are in the process of burying the murdered body of Lucia Vorloy. When they notice the player characters, they will attempt to flee. If the player characters do not report the murder, one way or another, the authorities find out about the murder, and they will suspect the player characters and seek them out to arrest them. As background, Lucia Vorloy is the daughter of Fortunato Vorloy, a wealthy merchant. Fortunato is the brother of Baron Vorloy, who is the head of the Vorloy family. Fortunato has been at sea for several weeks and has not yet arrived back to the city. It is well known by the city folk that Lucia spurred the advances of Stefanos Toronescu. Hence, he will be the prime suspect. In reality, Lucia was murdered on Antonio Radu's orders. As a reminder, Antonio's father, Anton, is the leader of the Radu family and of the Veiled Society. The murder was carried out without Anton's knowledge or blessing. The murderers were shipwright Ikarios, who has red hair, and his colleague, Zachariah Boyates. Both are members of the Veiled Society, and both hang out at the Blue Water Mead Hall, which is by the waterfront. Ikarios and Zachariah entered Fortunato Vorloy's house from its cellar. Lucia encounters them on the ground floor of the house. She tries to escape, but is captured. During the struggle, she manages to slash Ikarios' right arm and pull his hair, but Zachariah manages to get behind her and strangle her with a piece of thick hemp rope. They leave her limp body on the floor and leave. Antonito, upon hearing their report, ordered them to return to the house and dispose of the body. The murderers return to Fortunato's house, bring Lucia's body to the cellar, and were in the process of digging a shallow grave before the adventuring party has interrupted them. The player characters can find the following clues during their investigation. Other than being strangled by thick hemp rope around her neck, examining Lucia's body reveals that she suffered no other injuries or cuts. Strands of red hair can be found under Lucia's fingernails, as well as on the ground floor of the house, where the crime first took place. Small bits of pitch are stuck to the rungs of the ladder that connects the house's cellar with its ground floor. Pitch is used for sealing boats during the shipbuilding and repair. All 4 suppliers of pitch are on the waterfront, and all have sold pitch to a red-haired man. Blood can be found under Lucia's fingernails, as well as on the ground floor of the house. The blood came from Ikarios. During her struggle, Lucia tried to spell Radu on where Ikarios' blood has spilt. However, this may be too big of a clue, and I would suggest for the DM not to include this clue. Also by the bloodstains are dribbles of wine. This wine is from the far-off Truscan estates, and has a particular color and taste. The wine is imported into the city on Radu ships, and is sold mostly to taverns and inns in the wharf area. A Toronescu signet ring can be found near the cellar entrance. However, this is a planted false clue. The ring belongs to the spurred Stefanos. The ring has been missing for almost a month. Also near the cellar entrance, a short length of thick hemp rope can be found. This is the same type of rope used in ships. With Lucia's murder and Stefanos Toronescu known to be the spurred quarter of Lucia, public opinion of the Toronescu family has soured quite a bit. Some even accuse the Toronescu family of being the masterminds behind the Veiled Society. Whether it be at the inns or out on the streets, the player characters will overhear the negativity towards the Toronescu family grow. The common folk dislike the nobility, fueling their disdain towards the Toronescu family even further. When the player characters cross a marketplace to return to their inns, a crowd of angry folk are gathered. An instigator, who, in secret, is a member of the Veiled Society, is riling up the crowd. 30 of the Duke's horsemen are sent to disperse the crowd, and then a riot breaks out. The instigator then quickly flees the scene. The player characters can attempt to escape, or they can fight the horsemen. If they follow the instigator, he ducks into a small hovel, halfway down the street. If they catch and question the instigator, the party will learn that he is a member of the Veiled Society, and does not know who leads it. He knows that the Veiled Society meet in an underground chamber, accessed by a secret entrance at the Blue Water Mead Hall. The instigator also knows the names of Lucia's murderers. When the riot breaks out, all the building's windows will be shuttered, and their doors locked. If the player characters knock on a door, a young woman named Selena will let them in and allow them to hide in her house. If the party is trying to escape, a few blocks later, they will encounter a line of 15 soldiers, who will block off their escape. If the party fights the horsemen, they will need to defeat only 2 of them. The rioters will defeat the rest. The common folk will then hail the player characters as heroes, and they will be looked upon as the leaders of the riot. If the player characters are content with this, then their leadership will be challenged by a thug. Soon afterwards, 60 soldiers arrive to quash the riot. On the second day after the riot, the player characters are contacted for employment by their respective agents. The Dungeon Master should instruct each group separately, in order for each group to not know what the other is doing. Characters who were hired by Theseus, of the Toronescu faction, are given the message to get a package aboard a boat, named the Jade Sea, down by the wharf, and to deliver the package to Senator Apicillo's house. Characters who were hired by the Veiled Society are given the message to go to Aristo's wine booth on Vinters Lane and to wait for further instructions. By the Jade Sea boat, the player characters will meet Simeon Toronescu. Simeon Toronescu is the package, who the characters are tasked with delivering to the Senator's house. Soon afterwards, a number of armed ragged-looking men arrive and claim to be employed by Demetros, the self-proclaimed Prince of Beggars. They ask to also be part of the escort quest. Simeon readily accepts and will not listen to the player characters if they advise against it. As a side note, the Veiled Society has spies on all routes to the Senator's house. For those working for the Veiled Society, near the wine booth, they are approached by 10 members of the Veiled Society. They are given hoods to wear and are instructed to follow them. The Veiled Society members are instructed to capture Simeon alive. If capture is not possible, then they are to kill him. The leader of this group of men is Flaviar, who happens to have red hair. However, his hair and face are hidden under his hood. The B6 module's text states that Simeon's party enters the ambush site from the north. Yet, the module's map says they enter from the south. The Dungeon Master should decide which side Simeon's party enters from. When Simeon and his group reach the middle of the street, the Veiled Society springs their ambush. Player characters protecting Simeon may not recognize their fellow player characters, who are hooded and working for the Veiled Society, thus creating an interesting combat encounter. If the player characters manage to capture and interrogate Flaviar, the Veiled Society leader of the ambush, he falsely confesses that the Toronescu family hired him to kill Lucia, but he is not the killer. And he falsely confesses that the Toronescu family control the Veiled Society. Days after the Simeon Toronescu kidnap attempt, the Radu family instructs the Veiled Society to ambush the player characters. All of them, including the ones working for the Veiled Society itself. During this time, the city guard and soldiers are busy quashing a new riot and are unavailable. A chase after the ambushers soon ensues, leading the player characters to the Blue Water Mead Hall, and then into the Veiled Society's secret meeting chamber, where the final showdown with the Radu family takes place.